So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just um, kind of in a lot of political work, there's this like tension in the group, good tension between the concepts of like unity and democracy, and I think that's the those two things kind of crashing into each other and reacting with each other are what allow us to become powerful as a group, to build our power to make things happen in the world. So when we talk about unity, we mean, you know, the group functioning as a collective with a single purpose and a sort of carefully constructed agenda that we are, building together and then figuring out how to enact and drive forward. And this is like a process, right? So, we discuss and debate and we become clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve and how it is that we're trying to do it. And then when we've reached that some kind of synthesis on that, then we act, and then we come back and we, see how things went, or we kind of debrief. And then in that stage, uh, we might start to, you know, act as individuals again. And this is where like the democracy comes in, because we can't like expect to have we need to have everybody's individual viewpoints and everybody's experiences and knowledge contribute to that common purpose. And we need to synthesize the things that come from, that we all can contribute in order to have a, single powerful agenda. So there's this kind of give and take between these two concepts. And so a huge part of the work that we will be doing is, going to involve a lot of debate and learning. And uh, so inevitably a part of that is conflict between different people or disagreement. And what I kind of want to emphasize today is that that's not problematic. That's actually essential, and that's that kind of conflict and debate is the whole engine of how we are going to be functioning. But it has to be done in a way that benefits the power of the group and also respects the individual people involved. Um, so uh, kind of key to this, I think, is the attitude that we take towards mistakes. Um, and there's this quote that I really liked in the Boggs piece, where she says, the recognition, the examination, and correction of mistakes and weaknesses all provide additional energy for the advancement and acceleration of revolutionary struggle. So, like, I love this because it emphasizes how important and useful mistakes are. Because when we're doing our whatever it is we're doing, our organizing work, recruitment, campaigning, trying to build our party into a real force, um, we're doing that out in the real world. We need to approach it kind of scientifically. We're experimenting with. We're not just. It's important to have good theory and good theoretical understanding and plans and ideas, but we also need to go try things in the world and experiment and see how things go, and then update our theories and plans and try again. And that means making a lot of mistakes as a group. We're going to make mistakes together, and um, and then we're going to fix them. And that's the kind of thing that's going to drive things forward. And a, a difficulty with that is that, my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experience, is that ruling class ideology that Sean mentioned at the beginning, uh, has sort of taught us a really bad or a little like kind of counterproductive attitude towards mistakes, where instead of seeing them as opportunities to learn, we see them as like things to sweep under the rug. So I wanted to kind of actually, it's great that Sean mentioned that sort of ruling class ideology because we didn't even plan this beforehand. It's just here it is. Um, so I wanted to kind of go through a little list of things that we're all familiar with that I think of as kind of like capitalist or imperialist lessons. Things that we've all baggage that we're all carrying around from the world we grew up in. Um, so like ruling class ideology, kind of conceives of the world as there's a dominant person and a submissive person. There's a dominant class. There's a submissive class. There's like all of the imbalances of power and uh, that we're fighting against that we exist to fight against racism and sexism and all kinds of other forms of exploitation and oppression, right? That's um, we're taught that these sentences on here, these aren't true things. These are what the ruling class ideology teaches us, and we're taught that those things are unavoidable and they're just part of life, and that's a really disempowering idea, right? That we're taught that because it keeps us from trying to get together and act. Um, there's a lot of emphasis, I think, on individual rights in like capitalist imperialist ideology and liberal ideology. There's a lot of emphasis on individual rights, but the rights that are emphasized are the rights that are um, mostly useful to powerful people or to wealthy people. So liberal ideology emphasizes property rights a lot. Um, but what good are those to you if you don't own property, right? If you're never going to have a chance to own much property, then what good is it to emphasize property rights? Even political rights, um, that we technically have are quite constrained and they're mostly available to for use by people who already have more power. I think freedom of speech is a massive example of this where technically we have a lot of legal rights to express ourselves, but you know those rights mean different things to any of us and someone who owns a newspaper, right? There's so the but the ruling class ideology doesn't distinguish us. So I think that's a big part of what forms our that emphasis on rights forms our ways of interacting with each other. And similarly, we don't our the sort of ideological soup that we swim in uh, doesn't really emphasize rights that are more important to most actual people, like rights to material security and well-being and the ability to actually have some influence over the things that affect your life. So that's those things are not so emphasized in the kind of ruling class conception of politics. And they also teach us all these like, you know, disempowering lessons, and they try to keep everyone very cynical. And we've heard lots of the examples. I took all of these from one of those two readings, like expressions that we hear that promote cynicism. The poor will always be with us, right? That's biblical. Or you can't fight City Hall. How are we going to pay for it? All this stuff. That's um, like you know stuff that's said to kind of keep us down. Um, and then the big one that I think is kind of delicate is that we're taught sort of a form of individualism. And a theme here of this thing that we'll see is I'm not saying like, oh, there's this word and that's a bad thing. What I'm saying is that we're really taught to think of from our own point of view and to kind of get stuck in our own point of view and only value being looking at the world through our own eyes, which is important, but it also is in a way disempowering because uh, it inhibits our ability to like organize as a group and um, and all of our power for everyone here. Uh, Realistically, the only way we're going to have any power is collective power, and so this individualism, um, uh, when it's taken to the extremes that our kind of ruling class ideology takes it to, is another way of disempowering us, and it's very insidious because it, you know, we're taught, like all about the self and how important the self is, and 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 usually in a very positive way, and it kind of hides the um, ways that we could look at things that would help us build collective power. So that concretely, I mean, like we're really taught that whatever you think is true. I mean, there's the expression you hear sometimes, like live your truth, or this very kind of subjective attitude that whatever you think or feel, um, uh, is just kind of the be all end all of things, and um, and it's tricky because that's not always necessarily a, a bad message, but um, there's a lot of there's a lot of other stuff out there, right? And there's the potential for shared understanding and like things that we can all agree on because those things are facts, or observations, and like things that we can use with other people. So this sounds super abstract, and I kind of want to make this more concrete as we go. But you know, that's kind of a first pass at it. Um, so like all this ruling class ideology, like it translates into actual habits, in how we like habits that we have, that many of us, just because of the world that we live in, we bring to everything we do, and including to our political work. And what I've observed, like in your party, where I'm like constantly impressed and learning from all my comrades, is that actually I see people like know about these sort of negative habits, and are I observe people doing a lot of work to avoid them. Um, but I think it's helpful to kind of name them out loud, and I think people here, like especially like I'm sure people here have all kinds of organizing experience, and they will you'll recognize some of these things. So like we often, we're in a meeting, and we see that someone has, said something we disagree with, or we think that there's, the consensus is moving towards something that's really not a good idea, but we're kind of afraid to say something or to point out the mistake because we're worried about conflict. Or if someone does, raise a criticism, it's a pretty common experience that people, right? We've all seen people take the criticism personally, and then it becomes kind of like a one-on-one, um, you know, conflict of like pointless conflict because it becomes personal, and the actual goal of the criticism uh, gets lost. This is, I think, especially true when you see people like hesitating to criticize decisions made by leaders, or by like organic leaders, like people that are just, not official leaders, but just are widely respected. And often people who are feeling less sure of ourselves will kind of fall in line behind someone like that, and hesitate to criticize them. We also all hesitate to criticize our own ideas. We like our own ideas. They come from us. We like them, and it's hard to look at our own ideas in a critical way. Another one that you see is, you see people kind of like, we can get a bee in our bonnet, and kind of get fixated on a specific idea, and then try to kind of sell it to other people instead of like trying to solve a problem. We might take our favorite solution and then go try to look for places um where people might, we try to foist it on people, say. Um, or often people kind of favor an idea just because of where it came from, or because it's associated with, something that we generally subscribe to, and then, people can get kind of dogmatic and ignore criticism of an idea. And then I think that, I talked a bit about mistakes earlier and how important it is to learn from them and correct them together. And I think often, like, our sort of individualistic habits can stop us from participating in kind of pointing out and correcting mistakes. There's some really good passages in the reading, the Grace Lee Boggs reading, where she talks a lot about the different ways that people sort of hide mistakes or kind of like sweep them under the carpet when it would be more productive to bring them out in the open. So these are some kind of like habits that can get in the way of building our power. And um, and both of those readings, the kind of antidote to those habits is criticism. Or one often hears, like maybe you've heard before, the expression like criticism and self-criticism. Um, and yeah, I wanted to just read this quote out loud. It's a nice, straightforward thing. So the overall goal of criticism and self-criticism is to strengthen us for victory in the class struggle. Criticism helps us see the difference between right ideas and wrong ideas, and it helps us unite around what's correct. So you can see some of that like tension between the democracy and the unity, that productive tension happening in this quote, right? Because you're trying to focus in on what the correct, analysis is, or the correct course of action. And, there's lots of ideas coming from lots of people in a group. And by criticizing those ideas, we're, trying to arrive at a good synthesis. And I want to say criticism, often the word has this like negative connotation. The point of criticism is not to just like put something in a bucket, good or bad, and then go back and justify why we put it in that bucket, right? The point of criticism is actually to like find problems with something and try to fix it, try to avoid making a mistake. So for me, criticism, like if someone, I'm very interested in this idea because I don't personally always take criticism very well, because, we're often taught not to. But really, if someone makes a criticism, and they're doing it in good faith, it's really kind of a vote of confidence in the idea that they're criticizing, because you criticize something in order to improve it. And so you would only take the time and the energy to think through something and find what's wrong with it and try to fix it if you thought it was worth improving. So it's kind of helpful to me if I make a suggestion and someone responds in a critical way, basically, they're taking me seriously. They're taking the idea seriously. Maybe the idea is totally bogus, but they were actually respecting it enough to pick through it and see why it was totally bogus. Or maybe it was, the beginning of something useful and they actually kind of were trying to contribute. So if your comrades are offering criticism, then it's important, and it's difficult, but it's important to try to like bring down the defenses and remember that they're actually trying to help build something together with you. Now, that's like the ideal, but it only works if, when our comrades make a criticism, if we trust that they're actually doing it coming from a place of trying to help us build something, right? And this is one of those like chicken and egg things, because if you don't trust the integrity of the criticism, you are going to get defensive, and you're going to be right to get defensive, and then soon you're in kind of a spiral of of conflict. So we have to kind of slowly build up the trust in any group, I think. And this is where we come to like the practical principles that these readings offer. As like I've picked out a few of them. There's kind of a long list, and I picked out a few that I think are important. And I just want to take the last few minutes to go through kind of four of them. Just simple things that we can do that will help to like um, give and receive criticism in a way that helps us make sure that it's constructive. So the first principle is just be concrete, and in how you talk about things. Like I've not done a very good job of being concrete so far, but for example today. But by being concrete, what I mean um, is uh, I'll just read it actually. So remembering the difference between a fact, which is something you can observe and or you can test it out, and and it's so straightforward that someone else is likely to agree with you that it's a fact. Like, we saw this, it's a fact. Um, Different from that is a conclusion or like an inference. And I have some examples in a minute. Um, right? Because a conclusion is like you saw something and then you thought about it and you came to a conclusion. It's maybe it's quite solid, but it's not quite the same as just like a fact. And then there's like a perception, like an interpretation of something. And we all make these like a million times a minute as we watch what's going around us. We have our kind of perceptions of things. And then our feelings, right? And so all these things are important, but they're all different. And a lot of sort of unproductive conflict is, I think, caused um, by uh, these things getting confused, and people, uh, you know, strongly stating their perceptions as though they were facts, and then this leads to a lot of disagreement. So being concrete um, is just keeping track of that difference in the way we offer our criticism is a way to you know um, head off some of that negative type of conflict. Um, the second one, I've kind of summarized it. It's really related to being concrete, and uh, and I've summarized it as like does over is, and this is when you know um, I've sort of said on the slide some kind of quite uh, a bit of a waffle, but I think the what I'm really getting at here is that the way we talk about other people, especially, um, there's two options, and one of them is to kind of emphasize how someone's behaving or what role they're playing in an interaction, to use facts about what someone did or what someone said, or use facts about how you felt about it, rather than assigning a person to a category and saying, that's where they are. So like on the I made some kind of questions at the end if we want to for the discussion. And one of the examples I used over there is just like if you imagine um, a situation maybe where we were in a meeting together and we all agreed that we're going to take some course of action and someone volunteered and then they didn't do it. They didn't do the thing they'd committed to do. There's a big difference between saying, well, comrade A is lazy and, can't be relied upon. And right, that's putting someone in a category. Uh, and there's just no way that's going to be a useful thing to say, right? But if we say like, comrade A said that that they'd committed to do something and they haven't done it, um, you know, I guess it's our job together to figure out what the reasons were and try to support them to do it again. So, comrade A, why didn't you do it? Right? I guess this is basically another way of keeping things concrete, focusing on behavior, um, not on putting things in categories. The third one is simple, and I just see it coming up a lot, and and it's just not shooting the messenger. And like this is something you can go find examples of in like the Your Party WhatsApp chat if you want to, where someone says a fact about something, they report something they saw or they heard, and it's not a pleasant thing. Usually they told us something negative about the world, but it's true. And 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 it gets interpreted as though they support that thing or they're happy about that thing. So we can go through another example in the discussion, but uh, if I say, maybe I look at the news and I see, some very horrible person like Donald Trump being extremely good at what he does, being a very skilled demagogue. And I report that he's a very skilled demagogue. And then I might get a response like, how can you support that guy? How can you say good things? But I wasn't. I was just saying, in fact, he does this well, right? And this is a thing that happens a lot, and it causes a lot of needless problems. Uh, and then the last one before we can end is or proceed to the discussion, not end, is the principle that I think we should address conflict. So we're we're really taught to be uncomfortable with conflict. I think like it's very, very clear if you in almost any setting in our jobs or in our families or in our your party meetings, it's we're very uncomfortable with conflict, but the right type of conflict is actually what kind of drives everything forward. And so we need it. Um, but if the conflict isn't, if we are too uncomfortable and the conflict isn't addressed, it's going to come out, right? You can't bury the conflict. It's going to come out, especially interpersonal conflict. It's going to come out. And if it doesn't come out, head on, it's going to come out in like unpredictable, chaotic ways. So maybe we've had the experience, I think this is an experience some of us have had in your party where we joined later than other people, and there was already conflict, and the conflict was just kind of simmering away there. And then, you can say something and you don't even know it, but you've poked the bear and you've set off a conflict that was already there under the surface that, other people needed to deal with before and they haven't. Um, or another common way that, you know, conflict kind of comes out in an uncontrollable way when it's not addressed is in kind of like passive aggressive behavior or people doing things to undermine things, doing things to like, you know, maybe we reached a group decision and somebody didn't agree with it, but they didn't say at the time that they didn't agree with it. And then now that person is going to be unreliable in helping to execute that decision because they secretly don't agree with it, right? They don't support it. They think there's something wrong with it. So they're not going to, get behind helping out with it, and then we can't depend on them, right? So what should have happened was maybe they should have said their criticism before we made the decision, and maybe we would have realized it was not a good decision or something and made a different one. But yeah, so this kind of like hidden or like unaddressed conflict is quite can be quite damaging. I think we've probably all seen examples of that. And so it's important to like and difficult, but important to kind of address address conflicts out in the open, get out in front of it. And I think it's also important for everyone, for all of us to kind of try to keep track of when it's happening and help people to bring it out in the open and address it and help them get over the fear of doing that. So yeah, so those are the kind of four things. So there's like being concrete, there's emphasizing the roles that people and things play rather than trying to put them in fixed categories. There's not shooting the messenger, and there's like addressing conflict in a sort of straightforward, open way.